She stands alone at a military ceremony, just another civilian in the crowd. Until an officer notices her, approaches with cold authority. "You're not one of us." The whispers start. The stares intensify. Security moves in to escort her away. That's when she reaches into her worn backpack and pulls out a folded flag bearing an insignia that makes hardened veterans pale. An elderly man drops his walker and salutes her with trembling hands. The officer who confronted her steps back, face drained of color, because that flag was never meant to leave the battlefield, and neither was she. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story captivated you, please consider subscribing to support more untold stories of courage and sacrifice that deserve to be heard. The Arlington National Cemetery stretched before Serafina Veland like a silent sea of white markers, each one a testament to sacrifice. The mourning mist clung to the ground, weaving between the headstones like restless spirits. She stood apart from the gathering crowd, her worn combat boots planted firmly on the rain-damp grass, clutching a weathered backpack against her side as if it contained something precious, which it did. The 10th anniversary memorial ceremony for Operation Desert Spear was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Families of the fallen were already arriving, their faces solemn with grief that a decade had softened but never erased. Military personnel in dress uniforms created a perimeter of order and respect. Serafina remained half-hidden behind a large oak tree, watching her breath creating small clouds in the cool morning air. She had chosen her clothing carefully that morning. Nothing that would draw attention, nothing military, just worn jeans, an unassuming gray jacket, and those combat boots she could never bring herself to replace. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a face that had once been striking, but now carried the subtle marks of hardship etched around her eyes and mouth. Most noticeable was the thin scar that traced her jawline from ear to chin, a permanent reminder of a night she had spent years trying to forget. General Lucien Blackthorne approached the podium set up before the memorial, his chest heavy with medals that caught the morning light. At 62, his posture remained ramrod straight, his silver hair cropped close to his skull. A microphone squealed briefly as technicians made final adjustments. "We gather today to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice during Operation Desert Spear," his voice carried across the silent crowd. Men and women who embodied the highest ideals of service and dedication to their country. Serafina's eyes never left the monument bearing the names of the fallen. 15 names engraved in cold stone. 15 lives ended in a single night of fire and betrayal. Her gaze fixed particularly on one name carved near the center. Captain Alaric Draymont. Her fingers absently traced the scar along her jawline. She had rehearsed this moment countless times during her journey home. But now that she was here, uncertainty crawled through her veins. What right did she have to disrupt the peace these families had found? What good would the truth serve now after all this time? But then she remembered the flag in her backpack and her resolve hardened once more. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. A chaplain offered prayers. A congressman spoke of sacrifice and freedom. Family members were invited to place white roses at the base of the monument. Throughout it all, Serafina remained in the background, a ghost at the edges of memory. As the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, she waited patiently. This was the moment she had planned for. When enough people had left and the security had relaxed, she approached the monument with measured steps. The names seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips as she finally allowed herself to touch the cold stone. Morrison, Takeda, Draymont, Calderon, Whitmore. Names that had haunted her dreams for 8 years. Names belonging to people who had died while she survived. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice cut through her reverie. A young lieutenant had noticed her studying the names too intently, his expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. Behind him, Colonel Edmund Halcroft approached with 2 security personnel flanking him. Serafina had known this moment would come, had prepared for it. Still, seeing Halcroft in the flesh after all these years sent ice through her veins. He looked older, more distinguished with silver threading through his temples. But she would recognize that face anywhere. It had been the last face she'd seen before everything went wrong. "This area is reserved for family and authorized personnel," Colonel Halcroft stated coldly, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her civilian attire. If he recognized her, he showed no sign of it. Why would he? Serafina Veland was officially dead. Her body never recovered from an ambush halfway across the world. The Arlington National Cemetery stretched before Serafina Veland like a sea of white markers, each one a testament to sacrifice. She stood apart from the gathering crowd, her worn combat boots planted firmly on the rain-damp grass, clutching a weathered backpack against her side. The 10th anniversary memorial ceremony for Operation Desert Spear was about to begin, and Serafina remained half-hidden behind a large oak tree, watching. The morning mist clung to the grounds, wrapping the cemetery in a shroud of gray that matched her mood. She had deliberated for weeks about coming here, about stepping out of the shadows where she had safely existed for nearly a decade. But today, some things mattered more than safety. General Lucien Blackthorne approached the podium, his chest heavy with medals that caught the morning light. His silver hair was cut in the same precise military style she remembered from mission briefings so long ago. Time had added lines to his face, but hadn't diminished his commanding presence. We gather today to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice during Operation Desert Spear. His voice carried across the silent crowd. Men and women who embodied the highest ideals of service and dedication to their country. Serafina's eyes never left the monument bearing the names of the fallen, particularly one named Captain Alaric Draymont. Her fingers absently traced the thin scar along her jawline, a permanent reminder of a mission gone catastrophically wrong. Of the night everything changed. From her position, she could see the families of the fallen. Mothers and fathers who had aged beyond their years, children who had grown up without parents, spouses who still wore wedding rings. They placed white roses at the base of the monument, their grief a palpable thing that hung in the air alongside the mist. No one placed a rose for her. Her file had been sealed, her existence redacted from the official reports. Captain Serafina Veland had died in that desert alongside her team, according to every document that mattered. As the ceremony concluded, families placed flowers at the base of the monument. Military personnel in dress uniforms stood at attention, saluting their fallen comrades. Serafina waited until the crowd thinned before approaching, her steps measured and deliberate. She reached out to touch the cold stone when a voice cut through her concentration. "Excuse me, ma'am." A young lieutenant had noticed her studying the names too intently, his expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. His uniform was pressed to perfection. His shoes shined to a mirror finish. Too young to have served with Ghost Squad. Too young to know. "This area is restricted," he said, voice softening when he noticed her distant expression. "Are you family of one of the fallen?" Before Serafina could respond, a deeper voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here, Lieutenant Tristan Vale?" Behind the young officer, Colonel Edmund Halcroft approached with 2 security personnel flanking him. Serafina recognized him immediately, though he'd gained weight and rank since she'd last seen him. He'd been a major then, during the mission briefing, the one who had insisted their intelligence was solid. "This area is reserved for family and authorized personnel," Colonel Halcroft stated coldly, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her civilian attire. Worn jeans, unassuming jacket, and those distinctly military-issue boots that had seen better days. When Serafina didn't acknowledge him, his tone sharpened. "You're not one of us. I'll need to see some identification." The small crowd that remained began to take notice. Whispers rippled through the gathering as Serafina stood her ground, eyes never leaving the monument. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but the reality of confronting her past was different from the scenarios she'd rehearsed. "Ma'am, did you hear the colonel?" The lieutenant pressed, uncomfortable with the growing tension. "These men and women gave their lives for something greater than themselves," Halcroft continued, his voice carrying enough for others to hear. "This isn't a tourist attraction." The whispers grew louder. "Probably another conspiracy theorist," someone muttered. "These civilians have no respect," another added. A grieving mother clutching a photograph of her son turned to glare at Serafina, her pain transforming into anger at this perceived intruder. "People like you make this harder for us," she said, voice breaking. "Looking for some story where there isn't one." Serafina absorbed their judgment silently. Let them think what they wanted. She hadn't come for them. When a military police officer stepped forward to escort her away, Serafina moved with practiced precision, effortlessly slipping the grip, a maneuver taught only in advanced combat training. The officer stepped back, surprised by her technique. "Stand down," Halcroft ordered, his eyes narrowing further. "Who exactly are you, ma'am?" General Blackthorne, who had been speaking with a group of officers, noticed the commotion and approached. He studied Serafina's face with growing unease as though trying to place her from a distant memory. "Have we met before, ma'am?" he asked, his authoritative voice suddenly uncertain. Serafina spoke for the first time, her voice rough from disuse. "Sandstorm, Carabela, Dohazar, Pandra." 2 words and a date, a coded reference to a mission that existed only in the most classified files. To anyone else, it would sound like nonsense. To General Blackthorne, it was like seeing a ghost. The general's face drained of color, but Colonel Halcroft quickly intervened. "Sir, this civilian needs to be removed." Serafina continued, ignoring Halcroft. Operation Phantom Reach. Ghost Squad. Blackthorn's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A slight widening of the eyes, a tightening of his jaw. He knew exactly what she was referring to, and it clearly unsettled him. That's classified information, he said quietly. Which is why we need to remove her immediately, Halcroft insisted, gesturing to the security personnel. As security closed in around her, a grieving mother nearby shouted, "Show some respect and leave." The tension in the air was palpable. Serafina Veland, surrounded by those who should have been her brothers and sisters in arms, now treated as an intruder at a ceremony honoring the team she had served with. She hadn't expected a welcome, but the hostility cut deeper than she had anticipated. These people believed they were protecting something sacred. The memory of fallen heroes. They couldn't know that she had bled alongside those heroes, had watched them die, had carried their memory when no one else could. "General," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion building inside her. "I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to honor my team." "Your team?" Halcroft scoffed. "Ma'am, you need to leave before I have you arrested for trespassing on a federal installation." Serafina held Blackthorn's gaze. May 17, 2015. Coordinates 34 degrees 28 minutes north, 41 degrees 18 minutes east. Extraction failed. Team eliminated. Mission compromised. With each word, Blackthorn's expression shifted from suspicion to shock. These weren't details available to the public or even to most military personnel. These were the facts of a classified operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. "How do you know this information?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was there," Serafina replied simply. The crowd around them had grown, curious onlookers drawn to the confrontation. Among them, an elderly man with a walker made his way slowly forward, his eyes fixed on Serafina Veland with growing interest. Colonel Edmund Halcroft stepped between Serafina and General Lucien Blackthorn. "This woman is clearly disturbed, sir. She's obtained classified information somehow and is using it to disrupt this solemn occasion." "Obtained," Serafina repeated, a hint of bitter amusement in her voice. "I lived it, Colonel. Or should I call you Major, as you were when you briefed us before the mission?" Halcroft's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Ghost Squad," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Call signs Phantom 1 through 6. I was Phantom 3. "Impossible," Halcroft said sharply. "All members of that unit were confirmed Kia." "Were they?" Serafina challenged. Or was that just easier than admitting someone survived to tell what really happened? The elderly man with the walker had reached the edge of their small circle now, listening intently, his weathered face drawn in concentration. General Blackthorn raised a hand, silencing Halcroft before he could respond. "This isn't the place for this discussion," he said, his voice regaining its authority. "Security, please escort this woman to my office. We'll sort this out privately." "No," Serafina said firmly. "Not privately. Not anymore. For 10 years, the truth has been buried with my team. I came here today to honor them publicly, and I won't be silenced again." The military police moved to take her arms, but Serafina stood her ground. "Touch me and I'll put you both on the ground before you can blink," she warned quietly. Not a threat, but a simple statement of fact. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. What had begun as a solemn ceremony was devolving into a tense standoff with Serafina at its center. "Captain Veland was declared killed in action," Halcroft stated loudly, addressing the crowd more than Serafina. "If that's who you're claiming to be, you're either delusional or perpetrating a fraud that dishonors the memory of a fallen soldier." The elderly man with the walker suddenly spoke up, his voice wavering but clear. "Let her speak." All eyes turned to him, taking in his age, the rows of medals adorning his civilian jacket, the quiet authority he carried despite his frail appearance. "Sergeant Major Arthur Kessner," he introduced himself. "Retired, and I think we should hear what this woman has to say." Halcroft's face reddened. "With all due respect, Sergeant Major, this is a matter of national security." "So was the Ghost Squad," Kessner replied. "A unit so classified that most in the cemetery today have never heard of them. Yet she knows." He turned his rheumy eyes to Serafina. "How do you know, child?" As security personnel moved to escort Serafina away, she remained unnaturally calm. With deliberate slowness, she reached into her worn backpack. Colonel Halcroft's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." Serafina pulled out a tightly folded triangle of fabric. It was weathered with visible bloodstains along one edge. With practiced precision, the same precision taught to honor guard members, she began unfolding it. The fabric revealed an insignia unlike any official military unit, a midnight blue field with a silver scorpion and crossed lightning bolts. It was a flag that had never been manufactured for public use or officially acknowledged in any military record. General Blackthorne took an involuntary step backward. "That's not possible," he whispered. From the crowd, Sergeant Major Kessner pushed forward, his eyes locked on the flag Serafina held. He stared at it with recognition that transcended decades of military service. "Ghost Squad," he whispered loud enough for those nearby to hear. Without hesitation, the elderly veteran dropped his walker and raised a trembling hand in the perfect salute. His back straightened as years seemed to fall away from him, revealing the soldier he had once been. Serafina unfolded the flag completely, revealing names embroidered along its border, names that matched exactly those on the monument. One section of the flag showed the words Operation Phantom Reach, a mission designation that appeared in no public record. Colonel Halcroft stared at the flag, his face ashen. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, but the authority had drained from his voice. "The extraction team never made it to the rendezvous," Serafina said quietly. "Except I did." The whispers around them had fallen silent. Every military person present, from the youngest enlisted to the highest-ranking officer, recognized the gravity of what they were witnessing, though most couldn't understand exactly why. General Blackthorne regained his composure and straightened his back. With perfect form, he raised his hand in a formal salute. "Captain Veland," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent cemetery. "You were declared Kia alongside your team." One by one, the military personnel present began to salute her, honoring not just Serafina but acknowledging a truth that had been buried beneath redacted files and classified reports. Only Colonel Halcroft remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the flag with an expression that shifted from shock to something darker. Fear. An old veteran nearby whispered to his grandson, "Son, remember this moment. There are heroes whose names you'll never know, whose battles you'll never hear about, but they're the ones who sacrifice the most." The crowd parted as General Blackthorne stepped forward. "Captain, I believe we have much to discuss. Would you follow me, please?" Serafina carefully refolded the flag, her movements precise and reverent. She placed it back in her backpack before responding. "With respect, General, what we need to discuss should happen here in the open. I didn't survive and fight my way back for more closed-door meetings." Blackthorne hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting. "Some matters require discretion, Captain." "Discretion?" Serafina echoed. "Is that what we're calling it now? 10 years ago it was called classified. Then it became redacted, then forgotten." Her voice remained steady, controlled, but the edge in it was unmistakable. "My team deserves better than discretion." Sergeant Major Kessner had retrieved his walker but remained close, his presence a silent endorsement of Serafina's position. "General," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of service. "Perhaps we've had enough secrecy." Halcroft stepped forward, regaining some of his composure. "This is highly irregular. We can't discuss classified operations in public." "Then unclassify them," Serafina challenged. "Declassify Ghost Squad. Acknowledge that we existed, that they died, that their families were lied to about how and why." A murmur went through the crowd. Family members of the fallen exchanged confused glances. A woman clutching a folded flag to her chest stepped forward. "My husband," she said, her voice breaking. "Staff Sergeant Benedict Rowe, they told me he died when his convoy hit an IED." Serafina's eyes softened as she looked at the widow. "He was Phantom 6, she said quietly. "The best communications specialist I ever knew. He died covering our exfil point, holding off enemy forces so the rest of us could make it to the extraction zone." The woman's hand went to her mouth, tears flowing freely down her face. "They never told me he died a hero." "They never told you he existed," Serafina corrected gently. "None of us did officially. Ghost Squad was a special access program. Deep Black Ops. Our real service records were replaced with cover stories." More family members pushed forward. Faces a mixture of confusion and desperate hope for answers long denied. "My daughter," an elderly man said, holding up a photograph of a young woman in uniform. "Captain Elira Dorn. They said her helicopter crashed during a training exercise." "Phantom 2, Serafina said, the pain evident in her voice. "Our medic. She spoke 5 languages and could stitch a wound under fire without flinching." With each name Serafina acknowledged, with each real story she provided to replace the sanitized official accounts, the crowd's mood shifted. What had begun as suspicion transformed into something else, a collective reckoning with a truth long buried. Colonel Edmund Halcroft tried once more to regain control of the situation. "This woman is sharing classified information. This needs to stop immediately." "What needs to stop," Sergeant Major Arthur Kessner countered, "is denying these families the dignity of knowing how their loved ones really died." General Lucian Blackthorn stood silently watching as the carefully maintained narrative surrounding Operation Desert Spear unraveled before his eyes. His gaze shifted between Serafina Veland and Halcroft, his expression unreadable. "There's more," Serafina said, fixing her gaze on Halcroft. "The mission was compromised before it began. Someone gave our position away. Someone with access to our operational plans." Halcroft's face hardened. "That's an outrageous accusation." "Is it?" Serafina countered. "Ghost Squad was sent to extract a high-value asset, a defector with evidence of weapons sites. But when we arrived at the coordinates, we found an ambush instead. They knew exactly where we would be, exactly when we would arrive. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut." Military personnel exchanged uneasy glances while the families of the fallen listened with growing anger and grief. "I was separated from my team during the initial assault," Serafina continued. "I saw them fall one by one. Phantom 1, Captain Alaric Draymont, ordered me to take the intel and run while they covered my escape. I made it to our secondary extraction point, but the helicopter never came." She turned to face the families directly. "Your loved ones died because someone betrayed them. Someone who knew about Ghost Squad. Someone who didn't want that defector to make it out alive." Halcroft's hand moved to his sidearm again. "General, I must insist that this woman be detained. She's making unfounded accusations that threaten national security." General Blackthorn finally spoke, his voice heavy. "Colonel Halcroft, stand down." "Sir, with all due respect, I said stand down," Blackthorn repeated, steel entering his voice. "Captain Veland was one of our finest operators. If she's making these claims, they warrant investigation, not dismissal." Serafina reached into her backpack again, this time pulling out a sealed envelope. "I've spent the last 10 years piecing together what happened that night, following money trails, intercepting communications, building a case." She handed the envelope to Blackthorn. "The evidence is all there, including who gave the order to scrub the extraction." Blackthorn took the envelope, his expression grave. He opened it carefully, scanning the first page of documents inside. His face changed as he read, a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "How did you get these?" he asked quietly. "I had helped," Serafina admitted. "Not everyone was willing to let Ghost Squad be forgotten." Halcroft's composure cracked. "Whatever she's given you, it's fabricated. This woman couldn't possibly have access to classified intelligence channels." "Couldn't I?" Serafina challenged. "I was Ghost Squad's intelligence specialist. Accessing secure networks was my job. And some habits die hard." Sergeant Major Kessner moved closer to Blackthorn, speaking in a low voice. "Sir, I served with the first iteration of Ghost Squad in '91. If even half of what she's saying is true, we owe it to those who fell to hear her out." Blackthorn nodded slowly, then turned to face the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to today's memorial. What I'm about to say is unprecedented." He took a deep breath. "As of this moment, I am initiating a full review of Operation Desert Spear and the circumstances surrounding the loss of the Special Operations Unit Ghost Squad." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Halcroft stepped forward. "General, you cannot unilaterally declassify an operation of this nature." "I'm not declassifying it, Colonel," Blackthorn replied. "I'm acknowledging its existence and the existence of Captain Serafina Veland, who was erroneously listed as killed in action." He turned to address the families directly. "You were told your loved ones died in various incidents, training accidents, convoy attacks, helicopter crashes. Those were cover stories. The truth is, they died as part of a classified unit carrying out a mission of vital importance to national security. They died as heroes and they deserve to be recognized as such." The widow clutching her husband's flag stepped forward. "Why? Why lie to us all these years?" "Because that's protocol for units that don't officially exist," Serafina answered before Blackthorn could. "But protocol doesn't justify denying you the truth about how they died or who betrayed them." Her gaze shifted to Halcroft, whose hand still rested on his sidearm. Around them, military police had moved into position, their attention now divided between Serafina and the increasingly nervous colonel. "Captain Veland," Blackthorn said formally, "on behalf of the United States military, I extend our apologies for the error in your status. Your service record will be amended immediately." He turned to Halcroft. "Colonel, I believe you have some explaining to do." Halcroft's face had gone pale. "This is absurd. You're taking the word of a woman who appears out of nowhere, making wild accusations, holding a flag that shouldn't exist," Kessner interrupted. "Knowing details that were never made public. Carrying evidence that has the general looking like he's seen a ghost. I've been around long enough to know when someone's hiding something, Colonel." The military police moved closer to Halcroft, responding to a subtle gesture from Blackthorn. "This isn't over," Halcroft said, his voice low and dangerous. "Some secrets exist for a reason." "I couldn't agree more," Serafina replied evenly. "That's why I'm here." In a private room adjacent to the cemetery's administrative building, General Lucien Blackthorn sat across from Serafina Velland. His composure cracked to reveal the weight of a decade-old secret. The evidence she had provided was spread across the table between them. Satellite images, communication logs, bank transfers, all pointing to a carefully orchestrated betrayal. "We received confirmation that all of Ghost Squad was eliminated in the ambush," he said, studying her face for answers. "How did you survive?" "I was separated from the team during the initial attack," Serafina explained, her voice stripped of emotion. "Captured. 3 years in a cell with no windows. 2 more years finding my way home through networks that don't exist. The rest spent healing and hunting." She tapped the flash drive that now sat on the table. The mission wasn't compromised by enemy intelligence. It was sold out from within. General Blackthorn's eyes widened as he stared at the drive. "Why come forward now, after all this time in hiding?" "Because tomorrow you're promoting the man who gave our coordinates to the enemy to the Joint Chiefs." The door opened and Colonel Edmund Halcroft entered, flanked by 2 military police officers. His face was ashen, but a dangerous defiance lingered in his eyes. Recognition passed between him and Serafina, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. "The Colonel has agreed to answer some questions," Blackthorn said carefully, studying Halcroft's face. "Though he maintains his innocence." "Of course he does," Serafina said, her gaze never leaving Halcroft. "Men like him always believe they're justified, that the ends excuse the means." "You don't know what you're talking about," Halcroft snapped. "Ghost Squad was 1 unit. A tragic loss. But war has casualties." "This wasn't war," Serafina countered. "This was murder. Premeditated, calculated, and covered up." She pulled a document from the pile on the table, sliding it toward Blackthorn. 3 days before our mission, $5 million was transferred from an account in the Cayman Islands to one registered to a shell corporation. The beneficial owner of that corporation was Colonel Fletcher Halcroft. Halcroft's face tightened. "Business dealings that have nothing to do with military operations." "The money came from Sahir al-Dir," Serafina continued. "The same man our asset was going to expose for selling chemical weapons components. The same man who knew exactly where to position his forces to ambush us." Blackthorn looked up from the document. His expression hardened. "Is this true, Colonel?" "It's fabricated. This woman has had years to construct this narrative, to doctor these documents. The banking records are authenticated," Blackthorn said quietly. "I had them verified while we were at the ceremony." Halcroft's composure began to crack. "You don't understand the complexities involved. That region needed stability, not more American intervention. The asset wasn't bringing intelligence. He was bringing misinformation that would have dragged us into another decade of conflict." "So you made the call," Serafina said, her voice deadly quiet. "You decided Ghost Squad was expendable." "I decided that one operation wasn't worth destabilizing an entire region," Halcroft shot back. "Sometimes hard choices have to be made." "By men like you sitting behind desks," Serafina replied, "while soldiers like my team pay the price." Blackthorn stood, his decision made. "Colonel Fletcher Halcroft, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into these allegations." "You're making a mistake," Halcroft warned. "There are others involved. People much higher than me. People who will make sure this never sees the light of day." "Let them try," Serafina said calmly. "I've already sent copies of everything to 3 different news organizations. If anything happens to me, or if this investigation suddenly disappears, it all goes public." Military police entered silently behind Halcroft as General Blackthorn nodded. "The names on that flag deserve justice, Colonel," Blackthorn said quietly. As Halcroft was escorted out, he hissed at Serafina. "You were never supposed to come back." Serafina's quiet response. "That's why I had to." When the door closed behind Colonel Edmund Halcroft, General Lucien Blackthorn collapsed back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. The evidence spread across the table lay between him and Serafina, veined like a wound finally cut open. This will go all the way to the Secretary of Defense, maybe higher. Good, Serafina said simply. Let it go where it needs to. What happens now, Captain? For you, I mean. Serafina looked out the window toward the cemetery, where her teammates' names were etched in stone. Now I learn how to live in the light again. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. By the time Serafina stepped back onto the grounds of Arlington, most of the crowd had dispersed, but a few remained. The families of Ghost Squad, waiting for answers that had been 10 years in coming. She approached them with steady steps, no longer hiding in the shadows. One by one, she told them the truth about their loved ones. Not the sanitized official stories, but the reality of their courage, their skill, their sacrifice. She told them about Captain Alaric Draymont, who had ordered her to run while he provided covering fire. About Lieutenant Isolde Venn, who had carried their wounded asset half a mile under enemy fire. About Technical Sergeant Nolan Hart, who had jury-rigged communications equipment to call for an extraction that never came. She told them everything except how she had survived. Those memories remained hers alone. Too dark, too painful to share. Even now, as the families left, carrying both grief and a measure of peace they had long been denied, Serafina stood alone at the monument, tracing the names of her fallen teammates with her fingertips. The stone was cool beneath her touch, solid and permanent in a way that memories were not. General Blackthorne approached with a formal letter. Your honorable discharge has been amended. Your status restored, he said, handing her the document. Benefits and back pay to be processed immediately. We'll need you to testify, of course, once the investigation moves forward. Serafina nodded, taking the letter without looking at it. And the others involved? We'll find them, Blackthorne promised. No matter how high it goes, this kind of betrayal can't stand. It already has, Serafina reminded him. For 10 years. Blackthorne had no response to that. After a moment he asked, What will you do now, Captain? Serafina looked up at the darkening sky. Learn how to live again. She left the flag carefully folded at the base of the monument, a testament to a brotherhood that officially never existed. The blood stains along its edge had darkened with time but remained visible, a permanent reminder of the cost of secrecy and betrayal. As she walked away, several veterans who had attended the mourning ceremony stood at a respectful distance, saluting her departure. Among them was Sergeant Major Arthur Kessner, who approached with his walker once more. 10 years ago, when they told us no one made it back, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Something broke in those of us who knew about Ghost Squad. We needed someone to survive, to bear witness. From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver pin, a scorpion with crossed lightning bolts, identical to the insignia on the flag. I was with the original team back in '91. Different mission. Same code of silence. He pressed the pin into Serafina's palm. We carried these. Not officially, of course. Nothing about us was official. Serafina closed her fingers around the pin, feeling its weight, so small, yet carrying the legacy of those who had served in shadows. Thank you, she said simply. No, Kessner countered. Thank you for coming back, for making sure they're remembered. Serafina nodded once, then continued walking away from the cemetery. Her steps were lighter now, as though a burden had begun to lift. The truth was out. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to begin. Enough to ensure that Ghost Squad would not remain buried in redacted files and classified reports. As she reached the cemetery gates, she passed a young female soldier standing watch. Their eyes met briefly, and Serafina saw in the young woman's gaze a mixture of curiosity and respect. She gave her a slight nod, an acknowledgement from one warrior to another. A torch quietly passed. Beyond the gates lay a world Serafina had avoided for a decade. A world of light and noise and people who moved through their days without the weight of classified secrets. She had survived the darkness, had carried the truth when no one else could. Now came the harder part. Rejoining the world she had left behind, finding her place in it once more. She slipped the scorpion pin into her pocket and stepped through the gates. Behind her, Arlington continued its solemn watch over the nation's fallen. Before her stretched a future uncertain but finally her own. The sky above was painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun made its final descent. In the gathering dusk, Serafina Veland, no longer a ghost, no longer just a name on a classified roster, walked toward whatever came next. She had survived when no one else had. She had returned when she wasn't supposed to. She had spoken truth to power and forced accountability where there had been none. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was what she had survived for. Not just to bear witness to what had happened, but to ensure it never happened again. To stand as living proof that even in the darkest operations, in the most classified corners of conflict, truth could still prevail. As night fell over Arlington, the flag she had left remained at the base of the monument, a silent testimony to those who had served without recognition, who had died without acknowledgement. Tomorrow, officials would likely remove it, return it to some classified storage facility, erase the small piece of evidence as they had tried to erase Ghost Squad itself. But they couldn't erase the truth anymore. Not now that Serafina had returned to claim it. The streets of Washington spread before her, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the city were the other men who had betrayed her team, who had decided their lives were an acceptable price to pay. Men who had never imagined that someone would survive to hold them accountable. They would learn, just as Colonel Halcroft had learned. Just as the families had finally learned the truth about their loved one's sacrifice. Ghost Squad might have been designed to leave no trace, but Serafina Veland had become their legacy. Their voice. Their memory. Their reckoning. And she was just getting started.